Hey everyone, this is Andy Hall, and with me is Jonathan MS Pearce. He writes at the blog A Tippling Philosopher at Pathos on the non-religious channel. Hey, sporting the swag, sporting the gear, Jonathan. Very good.
Always looking for the opportunities there to whop out the merch.
Right, very smart. You know, I'm not very good at marketing my own stuff, but I'm more than happy to help you out and anyone else who comes on the show.
Thank you, sir.
So, dude, we're here, as you well know. Yeah. So we're here to talk about cancel culture. You wrote two pretty awesome articles on your blog. One of them titled, "Is Cancel Culture Butchering the Center?" And the other post is "Cancel Culture, Choose Your Narrative." Before we get into the nitty and the gritty, how do you define cancel culture?
Well, I mean, that's part of the problem, is that, as ever with these ideas that are attacked, they're ill-defined, right? So the idea is that you're cancelling, or you're sometimes called call-out culture. So you're calling people out for some moral, some indignation that you have, that they have made some moral value judgment that you don't agree with. So you call them out and say that's not acceptable, and then you go and get lots of other people to call them out, and they get called out on social media. And then if there may be some people might be going to do a public talk, and they have made some moral value judgment that people don't like, supposedly the liberal lefties of the radical left of modern times, and this can turn into deplatforming. So they get the establishments where they're going to do a public talk to cancel their talk on account of the fact that actually it's problematic and they hold morally offensive views. And so that's why, it's called cancel culture. Or you get people to, cancel shopping, boycott here, don't do this there, and so the whole idea is that you get these rabid radical leftists demanding X, Y, and Z of the rest of society to kind of silence these people who have a freedom, a right to a freedom of speech. That's
sure. Right. And a lot of the current conversation about cancel culture stems from a Harper's Magazine article that was out a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's recently, it was a letter sort of saying that people should be entitled to debate things out in the open. And the letter itself was absolutely fine. I mean, it shouldn't really need to be said. And everyone in their right mind would agree that yes, if you've got ideas, they need to be put out there, and we should all be able to freely analyze and debate these things without the fear of being sort of closed down and cancelled and deplatformed and whatnot. So yeah, and loads of people signed that letter. Some really disparate names as well. The people you would expect on the right, who always talk about freedom of expression, freedom of speech. But then people like Noam Chomsky, well, he's always being attacked by the right, so he feels strongly about that. And then people dotted all around. So it was an interesting mix of people. But yeah, the Harper's letter really brought the cancel culture debate back out into the open.
There was a sentence that.
One thing we also got to remember is that this isn't a new thing, right? In my article, I refer to another article where they talk about chronocentrism, right? The idea that we have this bias about our time now and think, oh, we're going to hell in a handcart right now, and it's all bad now, and this is a new thing. But actually, cancel culture has existed in one form or another for a very long time. So we shouldn't be thinking that this is a brand new thing. What is new is the power of social media that can be brought to this debate.
Exactly. I remember being an undergraduate back in the day and hearing one of my philosophy teachers say that when they were going into academia, there were certain brands, certain schools of philosophy that were just out of favor. And if you majored in that, or if that was your specialty, you wouldn't be able to get a job.
Yeah.
Or it would be very tough too.
Yeah, and there is always going to be a mainstream, right? So usually, I mean, it's not often that we're 50-50 split right down the center on all things. So usually you have some kind of mainstream position, and as we liberalize in society, where we start to accept things like homosexuality and different forms of sexuality that were not on the cards in previous eras, then that mainstream position represents a loose consensus of moral judgment, and therefore if you take a stance against that, then you stand out all the more, because you are against almost the consensus. But it's whether that consensus has really been voted on by everyone, or whether it's just a cultural tidal wave that's happened where people are then reacting against it. And actually, there are more people perhaps who don't adhere to such moral value judgments, but they've kind of been voiceless. And the idea that by standing up and saying, I think that actually that, this particular position is right, because that really stands out, it might mask the fact that there are an awful lot more people out there who believe that. And so therefore, we're in this sort of battleground at the moment, and it's connected largely to freedom of speech, right? So, but we have to be careful, because freedom of speech isn't deplatforming. So, and cancel culture, these are separate issues. So when you see all these people who have supposedly been cancelled, they're crying about freedom of speech, but none of them have been stopped from saying what they wanted to say. And in fact,
exactly,
all of these people who have supposedly been cancelled have made huge amounts of money out of being cancelled, and are in a far better place now than they ever were. So your Weinsteins of the world and your Jordan Petersons of the world, who sort of harp on about cancel culture and claims of being cancelled themselves, are actually way more famous than they ever would have been otherwise, right? And they have a much bigger platform, and they can easily say the stuff that they want to, and they get invited to international conferences. And so this isn't a freedom of speech issue.
Yeah, you know what? There was a part of the letter, and I'm going to read it here, that I found troublesome. The free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is becoming more constricted. And it's difficult for me to agree with that sentence, because if anything, we have a much more vibrant exchange of ideas now, don't we? Partly because of social media. I mean, when you think about what it was like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the landscape's changed dramatically.
Yeah, and so even now, when you've got Twitter that is a massive platform and people can broadly say what they like, but then when Twitter starts putting a warning sign, like a really minor thing, actually, just saying you might want to fact check this, people go, oh God, censorship, and they say, right, we're going to run off and we start our right wing social media platform, Parler or whatever it is, and then people go over there and they're still able to say what they want to say. And in fact, they can still say it on Twitter. They won't stop from saying it. There were just the occasional, actually, we pretty much know that's a factually incorrect claim you're making, and you're in a position of power whereby making that is irresponsible. So we feel it's a responsible thing to put just a little asterisk here and say you might want to go and check that out, which is hardly censorship, I think. And so, I mean, again, it comes back to this issue of freedom of speech. And the problem is that freedom of speech is a massively problematic area, okay? So rights don't exist. Human rights don't exist out there, right? What they do is they exist in our minds.
Right.
And we construct them, and we get together, and quite often we agree on them. Sometimes we don't agree on them, and we have to argue, and then we vote in certain governments that agree on that freedom and vote out a government that doesn't agree, or whatever. But the fact is, they don't exist out there in some ether. This is my worldview. Okay, so because rights don't exist, how we make them exist is by talking about them, having the discussions, and then codifying them into law. And when we enshrine them into law, that's when those human rights have any meaningful existence. Okay, so when it comes to the freedom of speech, everyone seems to say, "Oh, we've got this right to freedom of speech." And it's like, yeah, okay, but no one thinks you can just say anything at any time. For example, if you, Andy, walked down the street swearing your head off, walked into a shop, racially abused someone with the worst language you possibly could, right, and just telling them X, Y, and Z to their face, shouting abusive language at them, do you think that's acceptable? Do you think there should be repercussions? Now imagine you're a 10-year-old kid, right, in a class, no one else can hear anything, and you shout abuse and swear at your teacher and give them racial abuse, right? Do you think that child should be stopped?
Oh, yeah.
So therefore, we don't think, none of us think that we should be able to say what we want, when we want, in whatever manner we want, right? So there is a continuum of something that's acceptable to something that's not acceptable, right? And somewhere along that line, we each draw our line as that's not acceptable, okay? The problem is trying to apply the law to that continuum is really difficult. Who gets to say that's acceptable and that's not? And when you understand that the freedom of speech, freedom of expression is not this thing that exists out there, it has to be enshrined into law to give it meaningful existence. And we also have accountability and equality to be thrown into the mix as well. So actually, you know, I can't just say anything. I should be held to account for the things I say, especially if I'm in a very powerful position. And the things I say shouldn't lead to someone else not having equality of opportunity, equality of rights, and all these sort of things themselves. And we have these hierarchy of rights, my freedom of speech against your right to this. And, you know, it's a very complicated scenario.
It is. I think in some areas, we could say someone like Alex Jones, for an example, getting kicked off of Twitter, YouTube. This is a net win for everyone except for maybe Alex Jones.
And the people who like Alex Jones, yeah. And so it's difficult because when you get someone who is spreading lies that can be really meaningfully harmful. So for example, if it's on a health matter and he's saying, you know, you should take this because he tries to sell all his health products and stuff, as well as spreading conspiracy theories and lies, which, you know, they're all dangerous in their own different ways. But let's take an easy one, like a health issue. So he's saying, right, for this, you should take this. Well, actually, no, you shouldn't. That's dangerous. And actually, there are better things you should be doing and blah, blah, blah. So is it responsible for a platform to give a loudspeaker to someone who is tangibly causing harm? And that's where it starts, because actually, you know, for people who don't know how to fact check or don't want to fact check or are very gullible, this is actually really meaningfully dangerous.
Right. Exactly. It is a danger to the public good and to the public health.
Yes. And then so when you're talking about freedom of speech as well, you get issues with where people in power positions can use freedom of speech to spread dangerous. So some people might call it hate speech, right? Where you might have a government in charge. Say, imagine a fascistic government like the Nazis, right? Don't want to go there, but I've gone there. But you know, they then spread harmful lies about a minority population, which ends up in really great harm coming to that minority population. Then you have this issue because actually defending their right to that freedom of speech is a difficult thing to do. So actually, I don't think you should be able to say that as a government and a person in power or an organization in power, because by saying that you are harming a whole group of people in really huge ways.
True enough. And you know, I cannot help but think that a lot of the reaction or attitude towards cancel culture is just because there's a more muscular left at this time, whether you're talking about Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, for an example. There are more left groups out there and being active. And is this idea of cancel culture just a way to silence radical leftists? I mean, you know, radical leftists.
Yeah, so that's
on the
really, That's a really interesting point. First of all, the left is arguably eating itself, right? Because there are so many disparate groups on the left, and there's no unity in the way that the right is able to get. So the right might have people who are really interested in gun rights, but then they're really, quite often they might believe all these things, but you might have a real gun rights advocate not caring too much about anti-abortion, but then getting on board with that because they're so interested in gun rights that they forgive all these other things. So you get this unity on the right, and then you get a huge amount of money, and then you get organized campaigning and strategic management, whereby the right fuses together in this kind of monolithic, or what seems to be a far more organized sense. And the left is like herding cats, you know, like atheists having all their different opinions and whatnot. And it's not one organization of people, right? It's the same with the left. Yeah. And so when you then start getting powerful mouthpieces on the left, the right starts getting really threatened. And what your point is really, really interesting, because it's very topical. So Antifa at the moment, who are not an organization, they have no membership, no official membership. They're now being sort of touted as a terrorist organization officially by the US government. And you have people like Matt Gaetz officially saying, Republican, officially saying we need to hunt them down. Now, what he's then doing is wrapping up everyone who's a leftist activist under this umbrella of Antifa and saying we need to hunt them down. This is silencing the left in a very dangerous way. And if you're worried about cancel culture and freedom of speech, holy crap. You in the same sentence, you're worrying about cancel culture and freedom of speech, and then you're saying no, you can't protest, you can't go out and express yourself freely. You need to be hunted down because you're no different from ISIS. Whoa, this is massively problematic for political discourse in the States. It's a huge problem.
Yeah, that is, I would imagine, the most extreme form of cancel culture. Being thrown into the camps and having horrible things happen to you, right?
Yeah, because you're right. You know, the radical level, the radical is so pejorative, but the left, far left, or that real unionized leftist group is now becoming a little bit more popular. When the Justice Democrats are coming along, you've got the progressive movement is becoming really popular, and what's happened is the establishment Democrats in the center, or arguably even center right, and they're not left, are also slightly worried about the rise of the true left. And you've got a real changing sort of political landscape in the US at the moment, where people are now being funded by microfinance, or funding, small-time funding by constituents far more than corporates and super PACs, and the whole landscape is changing. But I think you will. People are just feeling
what I found interesting
on the right and the center by the left that's coming out. But yeah, sorry, Karen.
Right. I just want to say hello to some of the people in the chat. Edward, Blazing, Wizard Pope, and Brainbug. I hope you guys are doing pretty well today. You know what? A phrase that you put in, or something that you observed in, I believe it was one of the 2 articles that you wrote on cancel culture, is that there is an element of moral panic.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, so it's a mixture of moral panic from the right and actually the center. So when I talked in the first article about butchering the center, what this looks like is the right either in a moral panic where they're just like flapping around going, look at this cancel culture from the left, or, and it's probably both, it's moral panic plus a concerted conspiracy to create a narrative of this dangerous left. Right. So that actually part of it is just reactionary, but part of it is very well thought out, I think, where they're painting a narrative of this threatening left and saying, look at them. Meanwhile, goodness me, you look at the right and it's far more dangerous and worthy of worry. But they're it's smoke and mirrors. They're just attracting everyone's attention, particularly on the center, so they can draw the center towards them by painting this picture of a very scary left. So when it comes back to cancel culture, What you really need is data to suggest that actually this thing is really as big as the people on the right are saying it is. And the data just doesn't particularly exist. My opinion is that some data does exist, but it's very sketchy and very poor. My opinion is that there are instances of true cancel cultures events, right? Evergreen and Weinstein and all that, these things do happen. But they are not, you shouldn't hastily generalize. This is not a massive plague of the left. This is a few instances I call a bumpy road on our way to a morally better place. But you don't go, oh, this is a bumpy road. Let's get off the road. There are rocks everywhere. There's landslides. Oh my God, we can't go any further. That's the end. That's the end of our journey, which is what the right is trying to say. You should say, do you know what? It's a bumpy road, and occasionally we might get things a bit wrong, but we are definitely going in the right direction. And we shouldn't be put off by the occasional bump, because our destination is a far better place than staying back where we were 200 years ago. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Oh, no, totally. And I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to answer it before I allow you to answer it. Do you think that it was foolish for people on the left to agree and sign this letter at Harper's before the election? Now then, my answer is yes. I would think that if I am on the left, I would not have signed that letter before November 3rd or before all the fallout from the election has settled, because otherwise it just acts as a dampening effect for Democrats and for people who are progressives.
I don't think it will have that much. I think in November, people won't remember that letter all that much. What the difference is there. So if you imagine you're Noam Chomsky, right? And you're thinking, I really agree with this letter. The sentiments of this letter are broadly, okay, you might nitpick a few bits, but broadly the sentiments are fine. But should I sign it because it might be hijacked by the right? No, thanks. I agree with it, but I'm not going to sign it. Or come back to me after November and I will sign it. Possibly. So there is an argument that you need to play politics, or people on the left. And arguably, this is what the right are better at, which is playing politics in all these situations by being a lot more strategic in the way that they think and act. So arguably, you're right, but I'm not sure that come November, cancel culture will be a big vote winner. But it is part of just this general narrative and background landscape that I think people on the left are just getting painted, tarred with the same brush. It's like, oh, you're a Democrat. Oh, you must want separate, this same toilets and or restrooms, as you call them, transsexuals, this and that, and all this. Oh, let's just throw it all together and tar Democrats with all these crazy brush strokes, and it's just. You can see that working for some people. I mean, for me, I don't have an issue with those moral judgments, right? But for some people in the center and the center right, they become really super important. Even though, in the great scheme of things, actually, you might want to think about taxation and redistribution of wealth and income, and you want to think about these far more important things that are going to hugely change a vast majority of the Americans' lives.
Right.
But the right are really good at that, which is by saying, look at all this, Yeah. Meanwhile, they're down here doing some, deconstructing the welfare state and
right.
and they're so good at it. And this is what's to me is what's happening here.
Totally. If they can get Democrats, progressives to fight amongst each other about this particular issue and not focus on Trump and not focus on the election, all the better.
Yeah. I mean, for some of these all modern liberal moral value judgments, political correctness, right? As they say, for me, it's just it's a price that we pay for civility. I don't have a problem with these these issues in the same way that some people really get het up about it. It's like, do you know what? If that's the price we've got to pay to be civil to each other, then I'm all for it, you know. And it's just so blown up because it's really useful for it to be blown up, because man, it's much with the COVID-19 around, it's much easier to talk about cancel culture and the radical left and look at these protesters and blah blah blah, but not talk about Medicare for all. Holy crap, Medicare for all should be front and center of this entire political debate.
It should be. And you're right. You know, and I was thinking too, maybe about, you know, during the 80s when the LGBTQA community were really fighting for their rights, there were some very aggressive people out there really pushing the envelope. And I think if they were transposed into today, they would be accused of being part of the cancel culture.
Yeah, so I mean, this is touching on elements of protest as well, and what you know, when peaceful protest doesn't work, when you take a knee, Colin Kaepernick, and you get ignored and pulverized by, you know, in the media by everyone, including the president and vice president, then you are gonna, things generally seem to get done better when there's a threat of a bit of riot or you know, discord in a much more robust way than just taking a knee. Everyone talks about how wonderful peaceful protest is, but it very rarely works. You know, you can draw out a couple of occasions, and, you know, everyone talks about Gandhi, but in the real world, actually, people like Colin Kaepernick just get completely steamrolled, and nothing changes. So it takes these sort of big protests, and that happened with the civil rights, that happened with suffragettes, that happened with gay rights. You know, you have to get a little bit out there, and yeah, you know, cancel culture, as I said earlier, has existed in one form or another for a long time, and you could apply that term to probably an awful lot of people through history.
True enough. You know, Brainbug from the chat just mentioned, can't we do the same with the libertarians and conservatives? That is, let them eat each other. And we did touch on this earlier. I don't know if you're around, Brainbug, but because of big money, the right, and, you know, just really is able to orchestrate the talking points so well. And let's face it, a lot of these quote unquote libertarians, they are not real libertarians. As no. You know, and I'm going to share something. I was once a big L libertarian. I was a card carrying member of the Libertarian Party back in my 20s, I believe. And I can tell you this: the people who are calling themselves libertarians today, you know, are just, most of them are just shills for the Republican hate machine.
It just can't deal adequately with something like a pandemic. Right, to be a libertarian, it just is totally ill-equipped to deal with that. But the point is a very important one. The left can eat itself apart, and the right never seems to do that. And partly because of the amount of money pumped into keeping the right unified and to have a strategic, a campaigning attitude to everything, where it's all marketing, it's all slick. You know, it's why there are more Democrats than Republicans in America, which is why Democrats should win every single election, but they don't, because the elections are the Democrats to lose, because the Republicans are so good at campaigning their message, and this is a huge problem. So again, this is part of the narrative where the cancel culture is, look at the left, they're crazy, and even some of the left disagree with each other, look, and they're eating themselves. Meanwhile, we can just keep our unified rightist agenda going, and, you know, and we won't tell you where we're getting our money from, but you know, follow the money. It's why climate change denial, follow the money. Oh, it turns out it's the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute and ExxonMobil and all this. You know, it's also predictable, and it's the same with general campaigning and the politics in America. Is you've had moneyed interests on the right and on the left traditionally with the establishment Democrats, but now they've been pushed to the center. You've got these big moneyed interests of establishment politics, and then you've got the kind of progressive left, which is a totally different kettle of fish. And that's why I say that the whole landscape has changed. But we need to unify. I'm not even American. I would say Democrats need to unify much more effectively the establishment Democratic Party with the progressives to have a long-term future, a sustainable future.
And to tell you the truth, when I look at the signers of the Harper's letter, you know, a lot of academics, and I've been saying for a while, there needs to be more football coaches who are leading the atheist movement or who are leading the left than academics, because academics just like to argue, and there's a lot of analysis paralysis there. There's a lot of theory and not a lot of feet on the ground.
Yeah, well, but the right. So I've recently, I mean, Michael Brooks, is so sad that he died recently. So he's a progressive voice of the left who's a really thoughtful, politically active and politically astute guy, right? And his book that he wrote, Against the Web, which is basically a criticism of the intellectual dark web, who I see, so these are these academic thinkers or supposedly or pseudo-academic thinkers, if you include people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, but people like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, who are, and Douglas Murray, who are, in my opinion, gateway thinkers to the alt-right, a bit like gateway drugs. You know, you start on them and then before long you end up in the alt-right. But these guys have this, you know, and this was all a reaction against cancel culture with the Weinsteins as part of that, creating the intellectual dark web. But again, you just have this feeling of conspiratorial togetherness with these guys, where you just think it's all part of the larger right narrative. And again, the left is just splintered and trying to react against this from all these different positions, and it's just not unified at all. But the point being that you get these academics on the right now who are finding their voice and finding their audience, and there's a real battleground now within, you know, because you look at in atheism where you get a lot of people who are massive Sam Harris fans, who then, because I agree with Sam Harris on a lot of things like free will,
definitely,
and
definitely. Oh yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that's a lot more nefarious that you can get drawn along to, and then before you know it, you're sitting on the right and you're thinking black people have lower IQ than white people, and there's nothing more that can be said or done about it.
Yeah, you know, listening to Sam Harris at times, and which I do enjoy. I subscribe, you know, I don't pay, but I subscribe to his podcast. There are times that I'm pulling my hair out when I'm listening to him. And at times I feel like I'm listening to someone talk about phrenology, about the bumps on your head and how that shows how smart you are or what characters you have. Yeah, you know, there are definitely moments of that. I just want to talk about Blazing Wizard Pope's comment about being I think aggressive, a kind of aggressiveness in dealing with the right. And he was saying that this year, Amnesty International could declare that there massive pressure, peaceful pressure on Saudi Arabia, resulted in them no longer executing kids. And you know what? I'll go, yes. But the thing is that no one just asked them to. There was pressure being put upon them. Now, Colin Kaepernick, he wasn't really putting pressure. He wasn't. All right, let me just go for a second. The thing is about Kaepernick, he was just taking a knee, for an example, and that is more passive in a way than being in someone's face, writing letters, organizing boycotts. And boycotts do work a lot of the time when they're strong enough and powerful enough. So I think that there are two different categories. But I don't know. You go, Jonathan.
Well, I think it comes to economics, really, like you were saying, boycotts. But the problem is Britain and America are in the same boat here, because we pander to Saudi Arabia because BAE Systems sell an awful lot of arms to Saudi Arabia. And so we do a heck of a lot of trade, whilst at the same time going, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, that's nasty. Oh, you treat women badly. And we say all these things up here. But meanwhile, down here, we're just exchanging billions and billions of pounds. And it's the same in America. Khashoggi, Trump should have gone to town with Saudi Arabia, didn't, lip service, blah, blah, blah. And it's all about, oil and arms and all that kind of stuff. It's the same. Britain and America are on parallels there. And what you need is a very strong... I would say that you need to be able to boycott these people, but put a bit of strength behind your moral convictions. And I don't think you'll ever get that from a right-wing government, because either you're going to agree with those moral convictions, or you are going to think that the economy is far, far, far more important than showing moral strength. So I personally, if I'd been America over time, like running it for like 30 years, I would have divested from fossil fuels, become the global leader in alternative energy sources, so that you don't need Saudi Arabia, and then it just becomes about arms trading, and then you've just got to have strong moral convictions that are stronger than the desire to get a load of money. And that's really difficult, because with that money you're putting into place social welfare systems at home, arguably, maybe. So it is difficult, but you've got to be strong against people like Saudi.
Blazing Wizard Pope also mentioned about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther to be violent. They may not have been violent, but they would have been classified as cancel culture, and that's what the show is about cancel culture. And they would have been totally in that camp of people.
But Martin Luther King said some really interesting things about rioting. So if you go and research quite a lot of the quotes around the time, he says, I don't want, I'll paraphrase him badly, but it's the idea that actually the protest is a meaningful expression when all other things have failed. And so I think that Martin Luther King is possibly a lot more complex in what he was advocating, what he wasn't. But in what sense would you say that he was a part of cancel culture?
I think that any voice on the right today would have considered him to be canceling anything from small business owners, from from preventing them from doing their business, like, small cafes, small kitchens, small diners in the South that were segregated at the time. I think people on the right would typify, if that was going on today, would typify that as he is trying to cancel their businesses. It's bad for business. Everything is fine. You're just trying to cancel these poor people out.
So this comes back to my thing that I said right at the beginning, which is when you're considering freedom of speech, you need to also consider accountability and equality. So it's easy to say, I have the freedom to say what I want, but are you held accountable for what you say? And is what you say or do or sell or not sell, is that damaging equality of opportunity for segments of society? So on the one hand, it's again these competing rights. Your supposed right to say what you like, and the right of someone who is black in 1950s America to have access to X, Y, and Z, right? And these things can come against each other. And the problem is that rights often come against each other. And how do you arbitrate for when rights, is there a hierarchy of rights where one right trumps another? Or how do we arbitrate in that? And of course, because these rights don't exist out there, they're all constructed in our collective minds. You need to have a very robust legal system that is able to deal with that, which is in Supreme Court in America, which is what you have. But as long as it's not hijacked, and this is why legal precedence is so important, and it's all connected. So just to say, freedom of speech, I should be able to say what I want, blah blah blah, it's far more complex than that, and that's a far too simplistic way of seeing speech and expression. I think I didn't really answer, but it's the fact that these things are so complicated.
I saw that you quoted Ricky Gervais in one of your pieces, and about how he said that The Office couldn't be made today, and that's why he's against cancel culture. And I thought that is a That was a strange line of argument, maybe some motivated thinking on Mr. Gervais's part. Because, of course, The Office could be made today. It would just be different, right?
Yeah,
I mean, people still work.
I think he might be overreacting. Ricky Gervais is a funny one. He goes all over the political spectrum, actually, quite a bit. He can be sort of radical left to quite on the right to very centrist to. So him coming out against cancel culture does not surprise me at all. He's someone who uses freedom of speech. He's someone that says things. You see his speeches at award ceremonies. He has no qualm about saying some very close to the bone things, but actually he's never generally said things that are completely morally outrageous, right? So I don't know. I think there's an awful lot of people who worry about cancel culture, who will make big statements about them. But I think it's reflective of this idea that cancel culture is painted as a much bigger problem than it really is.
That's completely what it is. The Republicans in this country can only win. They can't win on the economy, so they have to win on culture wars, And so they're just throwing everything they can at this point.
Yeah, it's about shouting as loudly as possible about these things. It's where you think about Twitter is just radical left and radical right? But actually, they're just the people who shout the loudest. Most of people on Twitter are probably absolutely normal, fine, sitting in the center or on the left or right, but aren't sort of shouting to the hills about their views. It's the same all across societies. The people that shout the loudest often are then thought to be the prevailing thoughts of any particular side, but actually they're just the people that are shouting the loudest. Just because people are shouting loudly about cancel culture doesn't mean it is a massive problem. There will be at times when people are cancelled inappropriately, but it is not this pervasive plague that's ruining the left and ruining political discourse. Completely
agree.
You know, as Nesreen Malik said, don't confuse being told you're wrong with the baying of the mob, which is another problem, which is like it goes back to the accountability side of things, which is if you said something quite publicly which is morally wrong, or I think is morally wrong, then I'm going to hold you to account for it. Now, if I'm holding you to account, don't shout, oh, it's a mob, I'm being cancelled, I'm getting cancelled. You need to actually then defend yourself against what I'm saying. This is how we work things out. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you're wrong. But if we have, as long as we're both, and the idea is that it's seen that the left shout and don't have this balanced discourse, perhaps. But you know, the right shout just as much, but we kind of ignore them now when they shout like horribly about things. You go to Breitbart, you go to the Daily Mail forums, you go to Parler. My goodness, you talk about what the radical left are doing, you look at what the right are doing, and those claims that are being made are pretty disturbing.
Definitely. I have to ask you, Jonathan, over the last, I think it was within the last day or two, and maybe over the weekend, there were photographs of this couple here in the States that used, I guess they were protesting masks, and they were wearing Nazi flags as masks. I don't know if you saw that, or Nazi bandanas, maybe. No, I'm not sure. So, no, yeah, dude. Yeah, I think they're at the Walmart or at Target or at some big box store, and you know, they had basically the mask, the big, not plainly swastika, the swastika, red bandana, red background, and there was two of them, a wife and a husband, I believe. I know that it's illegal in Germany, from what I understand, to be displaying that symbol. What is it over in the UK?
Oh, I think so. I'm not 100% sure whether just the displaying of it, but there are certain groups now that are being made illegal, and it's illegal to be members of certain far-right Nazi type groups, and they do it under one of the terrorism acts that was passed fairly recently, maybe 2012, I think. So there are ways of stopping people from being members of organizations that in America you wouldn't be held accountable for in the same manner. So, for example, the Ku Klux Klan, it's not illegal to be a member of that, and it's all part of the whole freedom of speech. And there are interesting arguments either way on that. But if that group existed in Britain, they would almost certainly be deemed a terrorist organization, and it would be illegal to be a member of that group.
If the KKK isn't a terrorist organization, I'm just dumbfounded. That who is? I mean, of course, ISIL, but in terms of domestic, homegrown terrorist organizations, I would have to think the KKK would be. You open up the dictionary, because I'm old, I still use a paper dictionary. I would look at terrorist group, and there would be the KKK right there. There'd be David Duke.
I mean, they would be striking terror into the hearts of black people up and down America, especially if they were even more powerful than they are. But you go back in time, and that's exactly what they were doing. For sure, 100%. Yeah, it seems bizarre. Going back to sort of cancel culture and freedom of speech. I think that we have touched on this. There's an idea of hypocrisy from the right because you get things like it's smoke and mirrors. It's like, look at these leftists doing all their cancel culture stuff, and isn't that terrible? Meanwhile, I'm going to argue that you should not, or I'm going to change the laws in all these states so that you can't have bodily autonomy and a choice of the future of your own body, or Trump wanting to regulate the press, which is a First Amendment issue. Then all these are must in some way be seen as a form of cancel culture. Okay, you're not deplatforming people, but actually Trump is trying to deplatform CNN. He wanted to regulate, to give out licenses so that people who slagged him off in the press, media outlets that slagged him off, would have to get licenses in order to do their business. So again, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and we need to look at both sides of the political spectrum here to make sure that you understand that there's cancel culture operating in different forms in different places.
Yeah. Definitely. I want to bring it back to that Harper's letter for a second. Yep. Do you know how that started? Who was who first thought of writing that open letter?
I don't know, actually. It wouldn't surprise me if it was someone like Barry Weiss or so. I don't know.
Yeah. Because I'm not conspiracy minded a lot of the time, but if I was to be conspiracy minded, I would I'd be considering about who started off that letter. Yeah.
What would your theory be then?
What's that?
What would your theory be?
I would think that it is a genius bit of Republican secret agentry, maybe, or they're trying to undermine the left, trying to distract people, and they somehow convinced some fool to do that letter now, and to make it okay, to make it acceptable for people on the left to sign.
And this goes back to the point made earlier: is that what's moral panic and what's a very strategic project? This anti-cancel culture explosion that's happened, how much of it is a well thought out project on the right, and how much of it is just blind moral panic, which blows things up to be bigger than they really are. And it's almost certainly a mixture of both. But that's interesting in itself because of, again, as I said, it had people from all over the political spectrum were signatories to it. but a few of them, it's highly hypocritical. So you've got Barry Weiss, who used to be at the New York Times, who now no longer is, which was a thing in and of itself, because she was claiming that the New York Times was also liberal, lefty, and cancel culture and blah, blah, blah. But she was trying to get people cancelled from faculty staff at university that she was working at, I think, who were anti-Israel, right? Because she's of Israeli descent. So she was trying to be at the forefront of cancel culture herself, and yet she goes and signs this letter. And so, you know, it's just the double standards that so many people seem to be happy enough to ascribe to.
Oh, definitely. So we're heading down towards the end of our time, Jonathan. Is there a topic about cancel culture or an aspect of it that we didn't get to? Or
carry on.
Or is there something you wanted just to talk about that has nothing to do about cancel culture?
Well, I was just going to read one of the conclusion to my first article, if I may. And so I said, and so I see the whole thing.
Go right ahead.
And so I see the whole thing as misplaced worry. I think it is overestimated exactly how many places in the world are even susceptible to such left-wing academia, and how often this really is happening on our campuses and elsewhere. The world has swung hugely to the right. Now, that's not to say there isn't a trend towards this cancel culture in some way. Universities are overwhelmingly liberal, and conservatism will be a minority viewpoint on some of these campuses, and that provides a challenge for someone within that group. This is shouting about a minor issue and making it sound way worse than it is, and either explicitly ignoring or allowing ignoring of the far worse threats from the right. What is worse, having a woke culture or society run by bigots like Ben Shapiro and, well, Trump. So what is worse, this woke culture or Ben Shapiro and Trump? This is shouting about often minor issues and making it sound way worse than it is, and either I just said that. There will always be bumps on the road on the journey to progress. There may be mistakes, but beware the people who shout about those mistakes so loudly and claim, by hasty generalization, that they are representative of a decay in liberty liberal society. They are usually not the liberty liberals you think they are. Most people shouting about freedom of speech will somewhere along the line want to take your bodily autonomy away, or dictate who you sleep with, or disbar you on account of the color of your skin. Beware the wolf in sheep's clothing. Don't let these smoke and mirrors scare you off from the project to make this world a better and more equitable place for all, or provide an illusion for society so we all fall down the hidden trapdoor into a dark cellar of intolerance that might take years to reason and vote our way out of. So basically, that's my view on the whole thing, that it's kind of overblown, and we need to be really careful that we're missing the genuinely big threats from the right.
True enough. As you were reading that, it made me draw a connection between people who are from the right, who are screaming about cancel culture, and the First Amendment are the same ones who are pushing, quote unquote, religious liberty.
So religious liberty is an interesting one, because it's religious liberty if you're a Christian, but if you're an atheist, humanist, or Muslim, or any other, belief system, then actually you're shit out of luck. So
exactly,
it's the classic double standards again, where it's like, yeah, we want to be able to do this as a Christian, but really only for Christians. So we're happy to put up the 10 Commandments in our little towns, which is, against the secular backbone of the US Constitution. But we're happy to do that. But my goodness, if you put up the quotes from the Quran up, or Satanist statue or whatever, we're going to absolutely go mental. So it's okay for us. It's one rule for us and another rule for everyone else.
I think that's a great place to end. Jonathan, MS Pearce, where can people find you online, sir?
They can find me at A Tippling Philosopher, which is a blog along with yours, at the Pathos Non-Religious Network, which is where all the coolest kids hang out.
That is right. cool kids. Thanks, everyone in the chat. I think we had a good conversation.
Yes.
I learned some things. It made
Yeah.
me think.
Yeah.
And Jonathan MS Pearce, it's always great having you on, sir.
Thanks, mate. Really appreciate it. And I hope that America stops taking one step forward and two steps back with dealing with the pandemic and gets its arse in gear and starts leading.
Oh, so do I.
That's my final point.
All right. Take care, everyone.